Welcome back to
Hi
IT
everybody,
Project
and welcome
Management.
back to IT Project
In this
Management.
module, we're
Today
going to
we're
talk
moving
about a
from the
special
scope
part
statement
of
and
traditional
requirements
project
or the
quality
product
management.
backlog to the
This part
beginning
has a
of a
lot to do
project
with the
plan.
quality of the project itself and with the people who run it, especially the project manager. Of course, that may be you at some point. These are some of the most popular metrics that organizations use to track projects. If you've seen the previous video, this table will look familiar to you. In this module, we're interested in the project metrics. That is, the metrics by which the company decides whether you're a good project manager or not, and sometimes also whether you should keep your job or maybe not. Then, let's try to understand how an organization will evaluate your project and the quality of your management skills. As you can see, there are some logical groupings here. The first one is obviously about scope changes that were requested and those that were approved. This metric, which is often called scope volatility, is specific to the waterfall lifecycle. Remember that at the beginning, the scope was supposed to be clearly defined by the end of the scope planning activity and culminated in the project scope statement and the functional and technical requirements. Both of these were approved by the project sponsor then. As you can see, there is an undertone here of less is better, meaning that people hope you did a great job getting everybody on the same page at the beginning of the project as to what the final delivery will be. Naturally, if scope change requests are being filed and they are truly necessary, they should be approved as well, which means that the difference between requested and approved scope changes can be used to interpret how well you interact with your clients. As I said, this is a waterfall thing, obviously. In an agile project, you would instead track changing priorities in the product backlog. But then the person to make those final decisions on the basis of what her customers would like to see in the final product is the product owner. The second major area here is obviously project schedule. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at overdue tasks and tasks that should have started but didn't in a waterfall structure, or if you're looking at decreases in velocity in an agile format, where work that was supposed to get done in one sprint wasn't finished and is rolling over into the next sprint, pushing more work down the line. These metrics speak to your ability as a manager to keep the team motivated, focused, and engaged. The third major area is project budget. Quite obviously, scope and schedule problems will show up in the budget area. And this is also where you see earned value and all these acronyms, PV, EV, SPI, CPI, ETC, and EAC. This is the math that puts into relationship various aspects of scope, schedule, and cost control, and expresses that relationship as a series of numbers. These numbers describe, among others, your ability to control the triple constraints. The final area is people management. Are people working too much? If there is overtime, is that overtime being paid, or is it discretionary? Meaning, is it just something that your people do to get all the work done? Is there turnover on your project, meaning how many team members have quit or were let go? And finally, do you make sure that each team member gets training to help them learn new things that will further their career? While the previous scope, schedule, and budget metrics are tracked throughout the project, the people metrics, with the exception of resource allocation %, are usually discussed at the end of the project during the lessons learned session. But turnover certainly speaks to your ability to learn to lead a team and get along with people, doesn't it? That's why PMI has devoted 2 knowledge areas to people management. One is called human resources management and the other communication management. And if you think about it, people are what keeps your project going. So let's try to make sense of all these acronyms that produce one number that says something about your project. The first one, SV, is short for schedule variance. CV stands for cost variance. CPI is short for cost performance index, and SPI for schedule performance index. Then we have two estimates, that is forecasts, the ETC or estimate to complete and the EAC or estimate at completion. We will walk through these piece by piece, so don't worry. Speaking of which, at the center of this graphic is the term earned value. The idea behind earned value is to know at any point in the project whether the money you have spent on getting work done is really producing the value that you originally planned to buy at this point. So earned value measures the amount of work that is done at a certain point in your schedule, and it looks at how much you paid for it and how much of it is on time and how much isn't. Let's look at this with an example. Due to security concerns, St. John's Hospital needs to upgrade operating systems on 500 administrator laptops within the next 10 weeks. Our company, HIT Pros, will be paid $20,000 upon completion. So our scope is 500 laptop upgrades, our schedule is 10 weeks, our budget is $20,000. Look at this table below. In the first column, we see all our weeks from 1 to 10. In the second column, we see that the plan is to upgrade 50 laptops a week. This is constant work, so we divide the $20,000 by the 10 weeks, and we see that we have $2,000 available per week to upgrade 50 laptops per week. This means that at the end of week 1, we will have 50 laptops done. At the end of week 2, the 50 from the previous week plus the 50 from this week, which makes 100. At the end of week 3, 150 laptops, and so on. This is what we call the planned performance. This also means that at the end of week 1, our plan is to spend the first $2,000 for the first 50 laptops. At the end of week 2, we will have spent $2,000 plus $2,000, which is $4,000 to get 100 laptops done, and so on. That's what we call the planned value, or PV. This is our planning table. For future reference, our planning table will always be blue. At this point, we know the news can't be good. Now we need to find out exactly how not good it is so that we can figure out what to do about it. Here you see a side-by-side view of our blue plan and our orange actual values from the work as it is proceeding. We see that at the end of week 3, we planned to have 150 laptops done. But actually, we got only 100 done. We also see that at the end of week 3, we had planned to spend $6,000, but the reality is that we spent $7,500. So we spent more money than we had planned, but we got less work done than we planned. Let's calculate how much value the project has actually earned up to now. Perhaps that makes things not look as bad? In order to determine the value, we have to work with percentages. We know that at the end of week 3, we had planned to complete 150 laptops. That is roughly 30% of the 500 laptops. So we were planning to be 30% done with the work. However, in actuality, we got only 100 of the 500 laptops done, and that's only 20% of the overall work. We see already that there's a 10% difference. Should we worry? Maybe, but not before we have calculated the actual earned value. Alrighty, let's put all these numbers into relationship with each other. We know that our planned budget at completion, or BAC, is $20,000. We also know that we have gotten only 20% of the work done. Now we can calculate our earned value, which is BAC multiplied by actual percent work completed. So $20,000 times 20%. That brings our earned value to $4,000. So at the end of week 3, we have earned $4,000 worth of value for the work completed. But to produce this value, we have spent $7,500, which is almost twice as much. We know that executives live by charts, so perhaps the $4,000 earned value isn't going to look that bad. On our plot, we put the weeks on the horizontal x-axis and the budget dollars on the vertical y-axis. We enter our planned value curve in blue, and it's this beautiful $2,000 a week linear function. Then we enter our actual cost values up to week 3, where we currently are, in orange, and yep, that shows the $7,500, so it ends up above the blue line. Now we plot our earned value in gray and at the end of week 3, and that ends up way below the blue line and the yellow line, and here we are. So now we can calculate our first two variables. The cost variance is the difference between the earned value and the actual cost, so between the gray line and the orange line at week 3. So that is $4,000 minus $7,500. This comes out to a negative $3,500, which means we have a $3,500 size hole in our budget right now, or we are over budget by $3,500. The schedule variance is the difference between the earned value and the planned value, so between the gray line and the blue line at week 3. So that is $4,000 minus $6,000, which comes out to a negative $2,000. So we are $2,000 behind in labor. Oh man, this is not looking good. Now that we know our first two really important numbers, the cost variance and the schedule variance, let's go in for the kill and calculate the two indices which our executives will look at first. The Cost Performance Index, or CPI, and the Schedule Performance Index, or SPI. To get the Cost Performance Index, we divide our earned value by the actual cost that we paid for it. So $4,000 by $7,500. Our result is 0.53. That is, not surprisingly, our cost performance index at the end of week 3. It says that we have delivered only 53% of the value that we have purchased with those $7,500. So we have paid almost twice as much as we should have. We calculate our schedule performance index, or SPI, quite similarly, but by dividing the earned value by the planned value. That gives us 0.67 or 67%, which is 2/3. Now, if we look at the laptops we got done, we got only 100 done when we wanted to get 150 done. That's a 67%. So we are missing 33% of the laptop work. This puts us 33% behind schedule. Do I need to say that the ideal situation would be if both were 1? Probably don't have to, right? And yes, at this time, it's time to panic. All right. After the dismal earned value results we've just seen, it is time to figure out how much damage these numbers will do to our project in the future. For this, we will need to look at 2 major forecast metrics: estimate to complete and estimate at completion. As they say, money doesn't grow on trees. In an organization, it has to come from somewhere. That somewhere is usually the finance office, who allocates to the project sponsor or the product owner a certain amount each month or quarter or year, depending on how the organization does its accounting. From that summary amount, the project sponsor has to figure out how to fund all the projects in her department. This includes ensuring that at the end of the month, enough money is available to pay all the people and all the bills coming due. That's why it's so important that the project sponsor knows how much your project, with all its little ups and downs, is really going to cost. For that purpose, there are 2 major metrics: the estimate to complete and the estimate at completion. The estimate to complete, or ETC here shown with the yellow arrow, is a forecast of how much more money you will need to complete the planned tasks on the project, starting on the date of the forecast. As your project progresses, the ETC changes because your actual cost will grow as project funds are used to pay for work that's done. It can also change based on your earned value. Now, if your earned value keeps up exactly with your plan, meaning that the work you had planned is completed exactly when and how you had planned it, then your earned value will be the same as the actual cost. In many cases, though, there's a difference. The estimate at completion, or EAC, is the forecasted cost of the entire project. It will change depending on how your earned value for the project, that is the amount of work completed in relation to the initially planned budget at completion, performs. If your earned value is performed and costs exactly as planned throughout your project, your estimate at completion will be the same as your initial budget at completion. Again, because earned value data changes frequently, that is a very rare case though. So how do you determine at any given moment how much money it will take to complete your project? Well, that depends on 2 things: how well your project is going according to your plan, and how your organization likes to estimate. You see here 3 formulas for computing the estimate to complete, that is the ETC. If your project is running according to plan, and your earned value does not differ from the plan more than 5% or whatever percentage your organization tells you is okay, and I've worked in some pretty cash-strapped organizations that had a 2% rule, then you can just subtract your actual cost from the initial budget at completion. This works only, though, if you don't expect any costly problems down the road, and if you're confident that you can make up for any delays so that your project comes in as planned in the end. That's what we're doing in the plan you're seeing right here. It's a very rare situation though, and while the math is easy, it can cause lots of problems down the road. A more reliable way of calculating the ETC is by including your present project performance with the earned value and the cost performance index values. Here, you subtract the earned value of $4,000 from the budget at completion, which is still $20,000 because your official plan hasn't changed. Then you divide the result by your CPI, the cost performance index, which we remember was only 0.53 because you're over budget and behind plan currently. That gives us over $30,000 that you will need to complete your project, assuming that your earned value and your CPI will stay as horrible as they currently are. Big difference, eh? Now, the most reliable calculation will always be, and I have seen this in the best organizations that I have worked for, the bottom-up method. A few days before the end of the month, when your math is due to the finance office, you might want to send a message to your team asking them to re-estimate in days or hours the work effort that is needed to finish out their side of the project. That may be a lot of administrative overhead for your engineers and also for you, but when you get their estimates, it will be easy to convert the hours into dollars and you will have a much more reliable ETC. Once you have your ETC calculated or you have received the monthly re-estimates from your team, calculating the estimate at completion, that is the current forecast how much your entire project will cost, that will be easy. With a bottom-up estimate, here assumed to be a new $20,000, just add that estimate to the current value of your actual cost and you're done. If you don't have the option to go back to your team and have them re-estimate, which is more likely if you're working with an offshore team, you may have to use one of the two mathematical options. If your current trend continues and you expect that your CPI stays at 0.53, you could divide your budget at completion by the CPI and be done. But then you know that your people will recover from being sick, so that really was a one-time dip in your numbers. At that point, you could use the last formula here. You add the actual cost to the budget at completion, then subtract that from the earned value. That way, you have accounted for the extra cost and for the leftover work that didn't get done. If you don't have the luxury of re-estimating bottom up, this method would be the most honest. One of the things we're seeing, though, is that no matter how you calculate it, your project forecast shows that you will be over budget at the end. And it may be change request time to get your budget at completion adjusted to your new EAC and to get the financial baseline updated. However, before you submit that change request, really verify that this is the correct math and do your risk management here. You will want this new EAC to be reliable and robust enough for you to come in within 5% in future forecasts and during project closure. Many organizations take a long time to approve budget change requests because that requires shuffling money around among lots of projects to give you what you're asking for. In the meantime, you may be asked to look for ways in which you can fix the project schedule to reduce the amount of money that you may need to complete your project in the end. There are two minor mitigation strategies you can use, and if they don't work, two major methods that may help get your project back on track. The first of the minor mitigation avenues is called fast tracking. Fast tracking is a technique where activities that would have been performed sequentially using the original schedule are performed in parallel. In other words, fast tracking a project means the activities are worked on simultaneously instead of waiting for each piece to be completed separately. Naturally, you can only select critical path tasks for this. Otherwise, selecting non-critical path activities will not have any effect on your project schedule. The second one is a bit more intense. Crashing is the technique to use when fast tracking has not saved enough time on the schedule. It is a technique in which resources are added to the critical path tasks of your project for the least cost possible. Cost and schedule trade-offs are analyzed to determine how to obtain the greatest amount of compression for the least incremental cost. In other words, you will have to use more of your budget to pay these resources, assuming they're available to help out at all. The second option is to reduce project requirements or scope through the project change request process. This option will not increase the cost to your project, but some of the contracted scope may fall victim to the financial axe. This will only work if the project sponsor and all the major stakeholders approve, and you will have to determine where and when the scope that you cannot deliver now will get built eventually. Among the major mitigations, that is, when neither fast tracking nor crashing seems to work anymore, are more drastic changes to the project structure itself. Since the amount of uncertainty to perform in your project has greatly increased, you might decide to change from a steady waterfall structure to an iterative model in which your team can work on and deliver smaller chunks of the scope in an automatically self-structured set of time boxes. This will either push your schedule out, but increase the confidence in your ability to deliver the most important requirements, or it will reduce the scope of your project and ensure that the time boxes do the job of keeping the pressure on so you can get your project to perform. The major mitigations also include either partial or comprehensive replanning. Partial replanning is often also called rolling wave planning. It is similar to Agile in that you build, test, and deliver only the requirements about which you have absolute clarity. But the planning horizons are not uniformly time-boxed in 2 to 4 week increments. Typically, rolling wave planning happens in variable length phases, depending on the work that has been defined sufficiently. But I've also seen structures where each wave was just 3 months long. That depends on the organization. While work activities are moving forward on current and near-term deliverables, future work packages are being planned and elaborated so that they can hopefully begin after the current phase is complete. The last option is what I would call the nuclear option, meaning that you throw your old plan away completely and start from the very beginning of the planning phase with a new task list, a new work breakdown structure, new resources even, and a realistic schedule and budget. Now, you can do this only once for any project and probably even only once in your career with that organization. If you're lucky, that is, and if you are not replaced with a red to green manager, which, by the way, happens to be my professional specialty. So when are serious actions really needed? To remind ourselves, if a CPI is less than 1, we're over budget. If an SPI is less than 1, we're behind schedule. But what about the flip side? Should we maybe configure our project estimates such that our CPI and your SPI will always be greater than 1? The answer to that is a resounding no. In fact, most organizations follow the 95% rule. This means that if your CPI or SPI dip down to 0.95 for a week or two, there is usually no explanation you may be asked for. However, if you go below 0.95, explanations become necessary. The same holds true for the flip side, though. Think about it from an organization's standpoint. If your CPI is over 1.05, that is the other side of the 95%. then people are becoming suspicious that you may have produced the wrong estimate. They may assume that either you don't know how to estimate your project correctly, or, and this is probably worse, that you have padded your estimate intentionally in order to be able to cover for your own mistakes. At any rate, if your CPI consistently exceeds 1.05, you may be tying up valuable dollars that your project sponsor could have used to fund other projects or to help mitigate risks elsewhere. It's a similar situation with your SPI. If your SPI is consistently over 1.05, this could either mean that you are a lousy estimator or that you are intentionally tying up engineers for your project for longer than is really needed. And so they can't be reallocated to other work efforts that are going on at the same time or that are scheduled for later. That is never good. So you don't ever want to be behind, nor do you want to be too much ahead of the game. Remember that all the numbers we have calculated in this module to describe the status of your project may apply to waterfall as well as agile projects. In agile projects, you will also have to track, of course, your velocity and your burn down, which is a more basic measure of your productivity. All of these metrics, however, will go into your monthly or even weekly status report. Status reports are a fact in a project manager's life. That's because as a project manager, you're spending money that belongs to the organization you work for, and you're expected to lead a team that produces measurable organizational value. Quite naturally, a lot of stakeholders are interested in how your project is going, and numbers speak a quick and easy language. This is why a good status report is short, concise, and visual. In some cases, all you will be asked to do is to enter your numbers in some sort of SharePoint or other portal for the finance department to ingest in its calculations. Or the finance department may even just calculate your numbers for you. In that case, make sure you see them before they go to the executive level. However, some organizations are still old school enough to ask for a separate status report file to be filled out and submitted to your stakeholders by email or by text message, in which case you'll want to keep reporting extra short. The point is, though, that the most important stakeholders for your project must get your status information all the time. Here is an example of a traditional status report. It should be no longer than one page at the most, or fit into one screen on your project sponsor's cell phone. There is usually a section in which you report your CPI, your SPI, and your cost variance, as you see here. If your project runs in simultaneous phases or work streams, you report these numbers for each of the phases or work streams. If it doesn't, and that's the majority of small IT projects, then you report the numbers just for the current phase. We will walk through other fields in the status report in future modules. Now, let's look at what you have learned at this point. You have learned that earned value metrics are the name of the game when it comes to evaluating your project's current performance. You have also learned how to define and calculate earned value metrics such as planned value, actual cost, earned value itself, the cost performance index, the schedule performance index, the estimate to complete, and the estimate at completion, and how to interpret the numbers to gauge whether your project is successful or not. We have looked at the different ways to forecast what your project will cost in the end, and remember that any changes that you want to make official will require a change request. And while that change request is making its way through the bureaucracy, how to mitigate any impacts for poor project performance, from fast tracking and crashing to the big project structure changes, including agile conversion, rolling wave planning, or the nuclear option, which is a complete project replan. We have then seen where in a status report these project quality metrics go. At this point, you should be well armed to report your project status truthfully and know when you explain what. Here are the words that you have learned in this module. This list is shorter than normal, but it is much more intense. Please ensure that you can define and explain each one of them. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in a future video.